All right, today I want to, I'm guessing relatively quickly, go through how to create and use functions in JavaScript. This lesson was built when there weren't so many functions and there wasn't an iOS Swift course. And this is one of the first times that the Programming Logic Intermediate students got a good look at functions. For most of you, functions are old hat nowadays, so there shouldn't be too much new here. We should be able to go through it pretty quickly. You'll have what's left of the week for lab to work on the Part 9 assignment or Unit 9 assignment. And then in the next unit, we'll get into validation using JavaScript, and that should be a little more enlightening. Why do we use functions? By now, you should know to break large chunks of code into smaller pieces to apply methods to classes. Functions and methods really not that much different. Biggest difference primarily is one's in a class and one's not. Other than that, they behave very, very similarly. And we also can create reusable stuff. When you download the starter for this unit, I had it here somewhere, you download the starter, you'll see that Volcker tools are in there. That's just a bunch of functions, some of which have been combined into a library of functions. And that's something we'll do next semester as well. When we build our project, we'll create libraries of JavaScript functions that we can bring together so that when you import one, you always get the rest. Most of mine are individual, but they can be in libraries as well. So it's another example of why we use functions to give us that reusability. As in most languages, JavaScript has two kinds of functions. Anonymous functions in most languages don't have a name. In JavaScript, the anonymous functions are still given a name, but they're considered a variable, which is kind of bizarre. I don't use these very often. Our dollar function that we use to get at certain elements of a web page is an anonymous function with the name of dollar. They can also be used inside of classes to hide some stuff and just have functions that don't need names, particularly event handlers. In other languages, event handlers will be functions that are attached to the object and say, here's my click event handler. But they don't really give it a name. So those are kind of bizarre. Don't use them very often, but you'll see some examples on the web. Most functions that we're going to write look like functions in other languages. Keyword is function in JavaScript, followed by the name of the function. There still seems to be some debate on whether that should be camel case or title case. I'm still fighting with myself, so you'll see a mix. Really, functions do something. And so they often will start with a lowercase letter to let you know what they're doing, a verb and then a noun. But as long as it's not all capitalized and not all lowercase, I should be okay with it. And then in parentheses, a list of parameters that you want to send into that function. Both of the functions accept parameters. When there are no parameters in your function definition, you still have to include the parentheses. These parentheses still have to be here even if there are no parameters. If you have two or more, separate them with a comma, nothing new there. In JavaScript, these are a little different than other languages. They're considered local variables, but we do not have to declare them, so you don't have to add a var to them. You simply put the parameter name, no type, because JavaScript is typeless. There's no type. Simply put the parameter name in the parentheses, and JavaScript will expect those values to come in. Go a little bit more, then we'll start writing some code here. You can have optional parameters. In JavaScript, they do this a little bit differently. In most languages, if you put an equal sign after a parameter's name and assign an initial value, that makes it optional. And if it isn't sent in, then you get that optional value. In JavaScript, it's done a little bit differently. JavaScript provides you access to an arguments array. Whenever you call a function, the arguments to that function, those are the values that are stuck in the parameters. Technically, arguments are what you send in when you call a function. Parameters are what you describe to receive those, but those two terms are almost used interchangeably nowadays. The stuff that gets sent in. The arguments is an array, and it can contain any number of values. And you can use that then to your advantage to say, how many are there? If there's two, then I got both of what I was expecting. If there's only one, then one of them's missing. And I want to deal with that. You access any of the elements like you do any other array element using a square bracket. So using that, you can define some very, very flexible parameters. Some people write JavaScript functions without any parameters listed in the parentheses at all. You want to send stuff in? Go ahead, and we'll process with it. And I'll do a couple of examples of these so that you can see them. You can also check a name to see if it's undefined. It's a triple equals. If it's undefined, it's another way to look at it. I usually just count how many there are and deal with it from there. So let's write a function or two here. I'm going to go over to that sample starter. There are two files we need to mess with. There's the functions1 HTML, basically index. And the first couple of years I built these, I put all the JavaScript actually inside my body just as a demonstration. And I had all the functions in here, but now I have a functions.js file, which is external, that we're going to link in instead. So right now that's empty, and that's where we're going to write our functions. But before I can use that, I have to link it in. So I'm going to use the script tag. Get rid of the extra lines here. Use the script tag, and remember, if you're bringing it in from the outside, it looks just like that, except it includes a source equals attribute to designate where these are. The path name is it's a JavaScript folder, and the name of the file is functions.js. So in the source here, we have to say the JavaScript folder / functions.js. That should bring it in. And then just for testing purposes, we're going to put some JavaScript in here and just do a bunch of document write lines and have it spit out stuff. So the page itself right now is blank. Before I forget, I'm going to save that. And then let's go to functions and write our first function. I've gotten a number of your unit 8s back, and on the evaluation sheet, which I don't think I shared with you ahead of time, right? You didn't get to see those. It's time to learn how to write code from requirements instead of from evaluation sheets. What I have seen is documentation for most of you just went out the window because Volker said you don't have to do it anymore. So I haven't been marking you wrong, but I still have been giving you subtle hints that maybe it's a good idea to still describe some of your variables that have lame names, and definitely I would put a description at the top of your functions to describe what the function does. So this is going to be a classic function. This function generates a random number between the min and max provided by the user. And the user in this case is a program. The user program, whoever is calling this function. It's not going to be one of those anonymous functions. I'm just going to create a regular function, so the keyword is function. I'm going to call it getRandom, and I've been using all caps here, so I'm just going to stick with that. And at least in this version, I expect two parameters, a minimum value and a maximum value. And then curly brackets. It's amazing how much these documentation, if nothing else, it splits your functions up a little bit so they're not stacked all on top of each other and you can read the code a little bit better. I still recommend you do it. I do it, every one of my functions, I don't care which one of my programs you're looking at, if it's missing a description, it's because I was in a real big hurry. Most of the time I put descriptions on all my functions. Variables, maybe, but depends on the name. Inside here, we don't have a whole lot to do. I think it even gave us the code here. Okay, we're going to use the return statement. Any function that returns a value, notice in JavaScript, because everything is typeless, functions are also typeless. You don't have to designate what type of value this returns. If it doesn't return anything, you can put a return statement in or just leave it out. We don't have to designate like you did in C# or in Swift that this function returns one of these things. Whatever it is, just return it. So in this case, we've got a somewhat complicated formula, but not too bad. So I'm simply going to say return. And then according to my cheat sheet here, there is a math class that has a floor function that's to round down. Basically strip off any decimal places we get. And then math.random generates probably a random number between 0 and 1. Pretty sure by looking at this formula it's 0 and 1. So in my return statement, I'm going to start with math.floor. What are we going to round down? We're going to round down a random number. Math.random, parentheses. Now that'll give me a number between 0 and 1, and now I need to multiply that by my range. That's going to be in parentheses. The range is the max minus the min plus 1. If I want numbers between 20 and 10, inclusive, that's 11 numbers. Count them on your fingers if you need to. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20. 20, you ran out of fingers. There's 11 there. That's where the plus 1 comes. So when you subtract 20 from, or 10 from 20, you get 10. But there's another number in there if you want the limits. So it's always plus 1. And then I'm going to add to that the minimum so that I don't start at 0. I start at whatever my minimum value is. Pretty standard stuff. If you look at my Evoker tools for C#, uses basically the same formula. It's PHP uses basically the same formula. The only reason they differ is sometimes the random functions give you values other than 0 and 1. 0 to 1. So that should give me a random number.
Why do you need the math forward?
Because this will still have decimal places and I want whole numbers. Okay, save that, go back to my functions, and in the body tag, just to test this real quick, I'm going to put in a document write line and just say get random. And I'll give it 10 to 25. And I'm even going to put the second parenthesis in that I always forget.
Is that gonna work?
Why not?
Is it max then min or min then max?
Min max.
Oh.
And even if it weren't, the range is still the same. And we could absolute value it in case somebody puts them in backwards, but most of the time you put min max. So I'm going to save everything here, and I'm going to go up to my menu here and run it in Firefox. Should launch it over there. There it goes. And there's my random number 24. Okay, but tell you what, let's do a bunch of them here. I'm going to wrap a for loop around that and generate like 25 of them and see what they look like. For I, variable I equals 1, as long as I is less than or equal to 25, I plus plus. Don't really need any curly brackets, though. We're going to get creative with this. I don't think so. Don't need any curly brackets because there's only one statement. I still like to document the end of my for loop, but that's optional. And now I can look at those numbers and I see an 11, I see a 25, so I got the high end. I don't see a 10. So maybe there's something wrong with my code that I'm not getting 10s. I think it's just a matter of luck. Yep, there's a 10. But I would run this a couple of times. Make sure you see the mins and the maxes to make sure your get random works if you were writing your own. And look to make sure there's no 26s or 9s floating around in there. But I've had a 10 now and I've had a 25, not necessarily in the same set, but that's got nothing to do with it. So that's a function. It's got a couple of parameters. The other thing we can do, and let's do that, is modify our function to have an optional parameter. Like what? Like the min. What should the min be if we don't provide one?
0.
0 or 1, either one. I'm going to go with your advice. So I'm going over to the functions. And now before I do my return statement, I need to figure out if one of those is optional, if they're both optional, right? Every parameter is optional. So what I now have to figure out is how many did I get? If I don't get at least one, my function isn't going to work very well. Because then what do you get? If you say, give me a random number, what do you give them?
Between 0 and 1.
Between 0 and 0 or between 0, and that's probably not what they want. Otherwise, they just use math.random. So I'm going to modify my description here. The max parameter, no, the min parameter is optional, but max must always be provided. And then maybe here in parentheses put a 0 as the default. If you look at the documentation of the functions that I share with you in Invoker Tools, there's also something else I put in here, and that's a sample call. In this case, it's pretty obvious, but we'll do it anyways. Sample call would be new number equals get random 10 to 25, but since the first parameter is optional, there's another example. When you write these functions, they make perfect sense to you, and all the parameters and which ones are optional, and when you use them for the first time, everything's great, and then you put them in your library, and 3 months later, you have to study the code to figure out what the heck you wanted to do. When I look at my date formatting, we'll use it a little bit today. When I look at my number formatting, I always want to know, give me some examples. How do I call these? And even though here is fairly straightforward, having a couple sample calls, I don't even have to read the description. I just mostly go right to the sample calls and say, okay, I see how this works. But now how can we sense that the first one is missing by looking at that arguments array? Remember that anytime you call a function, the arguments array is available to you. Anytime. Every function within it, as part of the function call, has a, think of it as hidden, variable called arguments. But
Can you ask if it's null?
can you ask if it's null, if there's none? Not exactly, but you can say if the arguments dot length equals 0. Then I could do something. All right, but in this, the description says you got to send me 1, so it should never be 0. But if it's 1, I want to process differently.
So when you do the arguments, that includes all of the parameters?
Everything that gets sent to you, yep. And we'll do another example here where we send it none. Actually, we send it 20, but we don't expect anything. So we'll take whatever you give me. If there's only 1, then my minimum value is 0. Yes, sir?
Should it be like it's a max less than or minus 5 or something? Because if they send it 0, then you have 0, 0. So if you just say it's 5 less than the max, then it's always a range at least.
Oh, you want to do validation?
Not saying validation, but
No, if you want a random number between, I might be flipping a coin.
okay.
Then I get a random number between 0 and 1. Then I get zeros and ones, and heads is tails, and 0 is heads is tails, whatever. 0 is tails, and 1 is heads. I don't know. You feel free to modify these for your own library as you see fit. My point here is, how do I tell what happens? How do I know if the argument is there? If there's only 1, then the min is the one that actually gets the number. That's one way to look at it. But if I do this first, I could do this. I could say that the max is equal to the min. Because there's only one argument, so it has to be in the min position. And so I set the max to min and then the min to 0. That's one way to do it. The other alternative is to set the min to 0 and the max equal to argument at position 0. It's a zero-based array like everything else. I think it's arguments sub 0, excuse me. So these mins and maxes are local variables. You can change them. If there's only one number sent in, then the min is 0 and the max is sent to whatever that number was that came in. To me, that makes a little more sense than setting the max to the min. You have to look at that for a minute and realize, oh, it's because it's the first parameter. Otherwise, why would I want them to be the same? This makes a little more sense. Use minimum 0 and maximum is the only argument that was sent in. What if I send in 2? Then this if statement is false. Min and max are the two values that I sent in, and this is all still proper down here. If you send in 1, min has a value before we come down here, and max has a value before we come down here, and so everything works, and there should be a semicolon there too.
What happens if you don't send anything?
Then my function fails probably. And if you read, and then your program crashes, and you come read the documentation for my function and figure out why, and it says max must always be provided. Oh. I could throw an exception. I could just send back 0. What it would do here if I sent in no parameters, min and max would be undefined. And it would crash on that statement, I'm pretty sure.
So then how do you figure it out if you have, say, 5 parameters and 2 or 3 are optional? How do you know what ones are missing?
Your code. You don't know which ones are missing. This is not Swift where you get to put a label on them and say this one is this one and this one is that one. If you have 5 parameters, 3 of which are optional, they should be the last 3. I mean, this is an example that proves to you they don't have to be, because my optional one is really the first one. But what happens when you send one number in is it becomes min, and there is no max. Max is undeclared. But I can use the arguments array in JavaScript to figure out how many there were, and then if I got 3 out of 5, it's up to my code to figure out what to do with those 3 out of 5 and my logic. I don't know. You're giving me a lame example here where I want 3 out of 5. And if you get 3 out of 5, you have to make assumptions, maybe. Or you have to do some really complex code to figure out what type of data did I get for the first one, what type of data did I get for the second one, and heaven forbid they're all numbers, because then how do you know which one's the min, the max, and the median, or whatever you're looking for? It depends on your function. All right, so this should work, so let's give it a shot. Let's go back to save that, and go back to the functions, and generate a random number between 0 and 5. How come 5? Why not 500? I could. We'll test that next. So what this says is get random 5. And this is the beauty of Swift, right? Because we would say get random max : 5 in Swift, and it would be a little more self-documenting. Here, what's the 5 mean? Give me 5 random numbers? Is that the seed for the random number generator? Many random number generators have seeds to get them started. Can't tell, unless you go look at the documentation. Uh-oh.
I have an N all across mine.
You have what?
I have not a number all across mine.
Really?
I
Wow.
have nothing.
You got nothing.
I
That's
got
a
a
bunch of zeros.
I got zeros. My suspicion is that we changed min to 0, and it's also argument 1. So yes, it does matter which way I do those two things. So I'm going to go back to the functions and flip those two around. If there's one argument, it's the max, is what that says to me. The min is always 0 if I only have 1. And green's nodding, so that was the problem. Still getting not a number? Then there's something else wrong with your syntax. Check it over here. Were you getting numbers before?
Before the argument stop line thing.
Yeah. Got a double equal sign there instead of one? In this class, that firebug is critical. Make sure it's lit up, and my advice is have your console window open first time you're testing new code. I tend to miss the little one that's up there on the bug when I have errors, but if my console is open, I'll see the red text down here and I'll recognize an error. If you put that, this is what, I'm not trying to embarrass her, but this is what Brittany had. I want to check to see, we should be getting an error if you misspell length. She was getting not a number, but that may be because it got past that somehow, got past the if statement. Wow.
And no error.
Yeah, and there's no error. That's interesting. So now we got to figure out why. No, we don't. But this is an if statement, so this is false. Because this doesn't exist, is my guess. So this is false. We drop through and then use nothing for min and max. So they're all not numbers and they're undeclared, and we're now generating random numbers based on random number or undeclared, and that doesn't work. So that's my suspicion, that we're asking if this variable exists. But that's nasty, isn't it? Lots of zeros, lots of fives, and numbers in between. And if you wish, you can then change and call it with some other number. But I like this version of the function because it's very flexible. You send it one number and it deals with it. So there's that function. Questions on the optional parameters? Okay, let's do some more of them then. Since you don't have any questions, we'll do more. What else we got here? Display the number, use a loop. Okay, get random to make the first one optional. Discuss why we can't have a missing max because it doesn't make much sense. And now we want to write a function called average. So the next thing I want to also do here after my document write line is I'm going to concatenate a break to that so it doesn't get mixed up with my next one. Actually, that's going to break after each number and send them sideways. That's not what I want. I want all the numbers to go across after the for loop. Document write line, a break. And then my,
More than one.
that's okay. As soon as you start with document, the only downside to document write lines is the first one wipes out the page. There was nothing on the page in the first place, so that doesn't matter. It wipes out the page, but after that, the rest of them function. Yes, sir.
If you wanted to, could you use document write lines to recreate the entire page plus additional stuff?
Sure. You do a
Exactly.
document write line to create some paragraphs and some H1 tags. Anything you document write line, yeah, that would come up. So up here, if I really wanted to, and I don't recommend using JavaScript for this unless you want something that's dynamic, but you could do a document.writeLine and then say I want to print out an H1 tag that says function samples and H1 build a whole page with JavaScript. Don't recommend it. If that's a fixed thing, then just put the H1 in. Well, no, you can't just put the H1 in there, can you? Because as soon as you do the document write line, it wipes it out. The other alternative is to use all the inner HTML stuff. And I probably ought to throw Adam's example up here, but he's not here. But when Adam did his Unit 8 JavaScript, he found the code that adds new tags to the HTML that already exists. So he inserted a UL with an ID, and then he started adding list items to that UL as he went. So that can be done as well. But most of the time, what you're manipulating is what's already on the page. All right, the next function we want to write is an average function. And so let's write the function first. This function calculates the average of the numbers provided as parameters. Okay, and a sample call would look something like this. Yeah, let's call it calc average. And you can put any number of numbers in there that you want. I might mention that this function does not handle non-numeric values. In other words, I'm not checking for them. Not my job. My job is to calculate the average. If you want to send me text, then expect a bad result. Name of the function is average. No parameters, because I don't have any idea how many they're going to send me. Now I could put 1 in there, right? But that just complicates the issue a little bit. So you got to send me 1. I could also put an if statement in there. Let's do that. Dreaming this up as I go. If the arguments list has a length of 0, let's flip this around, is not equal to 0. Is that the right not equal to? What language am I in now? We'll see. If it's not equal to 0, then we're going to do our processing, else I'm going to set the total equal to 0. What total? Actually, I want to set the average. Yeah, let's do that. So I need some variables here. To calculate an average, I need a total variable and an AVG to hold the end result. I think that's all I need. So now inside here, I want to walk through the entire arguments array. Let's practice using the for in loop because it's so crusty. For, what are we bringing in here? Arguments. So variable A in arguments. Remember in JavaScript, when you use a for in loop like this, all that's basically saying is give A the value of every index. So it'll start at 0, and depending on how many numbers I send it, it'll get the value of every index. I don't have to bump it up by 1, it does that. I don't have to quit when it hits the end, it does that. But unlike most other languages, A does not contain the value of the first of that argument. It's just the index of that argument. So we have to continue to use arguments. Like above this, I'm going to create another document write line. I don't usually put document.writelines in my functions, but I want to exit, or I want to display my arguments. And then inside here, I'm going to add the new number to the total. Should initialize my total. I'm going to add the new one. Now, I made this mistake when I was playing around and used A. That's not right. That's the index of the current one that we're looking at. I have to say arguments sub A. A's value goes up by 1 every time through the loop. And then just so I can see that that worked, document.writeline arguments sub A followed by a break so we can tell them apart. Once the loop is done and we've processed all the art, where did I do my parsing?
You don't have to.
I don't have to. Int parse is only used if you're worried about somebody giving you something that's not a number. Then you parse it and you can ask, was it successful? That's what int parse is for. If you know that you're getting a number, big no, right? Big thing that you know, but we're going to the next unit learn how to do key press so that the user can't type anything but numbers. If you know you're getting a number, even if it's coming out of a text box, yes, it's text, but JavaScript does the conversion automatically. Once the loop is done, we have an average. We can calculate. Now down here at the bottom, we have to remember to return that. If you calculate a value and don't return it, it doesn't get returned. You have to return the value that you want to return. Change the name of my function here, that's not good. I'm going to steal this so I don't have to type it. But once again, what this does is first checks to see how many arguments we have. If there's none, then the average is 0. At least that's what we're going to send them. We could send not a number as well. Remember, not a number is just a string. So if I wanted to do that, all I would have to do is this. Otherwise, if there's arguments, then we display those arguments as we're tallying them up, calculate the average. Notice this doesn't display the average. We're going to do that in the main program. Normally, my functions don't have document write lines inside. Unless, of course, they're functions that generate HTML using JavaScript, then maybe, but I don't do that very often. Let's test it. Over here, and after all this other stuff, we can say document dot write line. This ought to be interesting. Document dot write line and then the average. So we're calc the average. Oh, I want to put in a separate line. Variable avg equals paste. Make sure that works. What do I expect the average to be? I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 numbers with a total of about 20, 60, 100 and change. So 8 and about 12, 13, somewhere on there. So here's my list of arguments.
Why does it say that there's one?
That one, because I didn't put a break after the word arguments. Is that what you're talking about? That's just the first argument. It's not how many there are. I'm curious. Should give me NaN. So that worked pretty well. If I send it just one number, that shouldn't cause any trouble, right? Less. Now, a couple things. First of all, up here, my sample isn't very good. I should probably say the average equals. And the second thing, many people will do this. You'll see this in a lot of different places. Dual returns. Now, Rena and I have been trained as structured software engineers, as we were called. using structured programming. Structured programming says a construct has one entry and one exit. An if statement has one entry point and one way to get out. A loop has one entry point and at the bottom or the top of the loop, a way to get out. But I'm seeing more and more code like this, where there's multiple entries. I don't remember whose it was, but one of you did that. You wrote a loop. Keep going forever. And then inside the loop, when the user typed the word done, then you put in a break command or the end loop, or I don't even know what the command is in JavaScript, to end the loop. But it was in the middle. It was jumping out of the middle of the loop. For me, it was a challenge because I looked at it and first made my eyes cross and go, wait a minute, loop forever? I knew there had to be something inside the loop that kicked me out, but it took me a minute to find it. And maybe it's because I'm old. This one isn't so bad because the function's so darn small. But because I can see both returns right next to each other. But if functions get bigger and you've got return statements, 2 or 3 of them, that any one of them could get you out under certain circumstances, it still aggravates, and I don't know, aggravates me. It makes me take a deep breath and shake my head at least and go, man, that's not structured programming. Why do we care about structured programming? Reen, do you remember?
Just because it's easier to follow.
Because it's easier to maintain, it's easier to follow.
It's easier for the next person.
That's what's supposed to be the issue.
Oh, no, sometimes it's easier for yourself.
Yeah, and you might be the next person, very likely to be. Harold, question?
Kind of. Would a do where clause work for
A
that?
do what? A do while loop?
While, sorry.
Sure. In this case,
Isn't
no,
it-
because
isn't
that was my point. Yeah, if you know the user's going to type done to get out, why don't you write a while loop that says
Yeah.
while the answer's not done, keep looping.
Isn't that more efficient, like code-wise, than going through ifs?
No, because the if showed up later. Right, as part of the case statement. So in a way, it's still processing the if. It didn't process the loop every time, but every time it had to process the switch. Is it more efficient? By something this size? I don't think it's going to be a lot more efficient.
WSD.
Yeah.
What would Spock do?
Well, gotta write that one down. That's good. Okay. I don't know. If somebody gives you a good reason for that, then document it. Said I saw this on the web that doing a while true and exiting the loop using a break. I think it's break 4 or 4 break or it's something like that.
Just break.
No, it was in the middle of a case statement. That would have screwed him up. I don't think it's just break. He had to break the 4. So I don't remember what it was. I don't remember who. I don't even want to go look. He lost 10 points because of that anyway. So I'm gonna have to fix it. Half a point because it did work. And this is becoming fairly common, particularly this one. I kind of like it. Why store it in a variable so I can just return it a line later? So here, not too bad. The return statements are right next to each other. It's a fairly simple module. But no, it's not structured programming. And that was one of those things. There's plenty of things that I beat into your heads for the last 2 years. That was beat into my head for 4 years. Thou shalt structured program. If you need to, make a loop. And back to Brandon's statement, isn't it more efficient? Most of the time, we don't care. We're more interested in the efficiency of the maintenance programmer than we are about the code, unless it's drastic. If we're running this loop a couple million times and then repeating it every time the user clicks a button, it's a game or something like that where speed is the essence, then maybe. But again, I'm not training you to be game programmers. I'm training you to be business programmers. And there, from the business's standpoint, it's more important to be maintainable than it is to be fast. And I'm sure there's exceptions. But that's where I tend to go. When you get to the real world and you see some of that, you might ask the experts that are out there, why did you write it this way? About 95% of the time, because it's easier. Easier to write, not easier to understand, easier to write. Okay, calc average, done. Questions on that one? think I'm getting close to the end of my notes, so let me plow ahead here. If I can find them. Again, you can say, once please, there we go. You can say if the parameter name is undefined. So you can ask if the third one is there. But that's not the middle one. Okay, it's not the middle one. If they leave it out, in most languages, the optional parameters have to be last. Okay, that all the required ones come first, so you know that they're there, and then whatever else comes, you got to deal with it. There's no way to skip one either in most languages. If going back to Paul's example, I have 5 parameters. I can't put parameters in for 1, 2, 3, comma, nothing, comma, fifth parameter. Can't do it.
Could you send an empty string?
You can send an empty string, yes, but then you're still sending a parameter. And I hope it wasn't expecting a number. In JavaScript, it'll handle it, but in other languages, if you send it the empty string when it's expecting a number, you just crashed it because you sent it a string. Optional parameters are very valuable. They make functions easy to use. And I don't have to, in most languages, it's called overloading a function. Overloading means I have 2 functions with the same name, different set of parameters. Because of optional parameters, we don't have to overload. We just say these are optional, and here's its value coming in. In JavaScript, we don't have that much flexibility.
I know normally when you see functions that have optional parameters in the middle, you have to send it a null to say that you're not giving
Or
it.
something, yeah. But even then, you're sending it something.
You're sending it something, yeah.
Right average, yeah, we did that. Calling a function, yeah, we know all about that. Here's an example of calling a function with a number that gets used right away in the equation. I could have done that as well. Over here, I had a document write line. Couldn't I just take this calc average and stick it right there? Probably. The only thing that's a little funky to get my head around is this is a document write line that calls a function that does its own write lines. Whoa. But it's only for testing purposes, so it shouldn't be too bad.
Is written first, the average is string, or the one inside the function?
The one in the function.
Because the parentheses and the function calls get done first. So yes, it would probably, but we're going to verify this, probably do the function call first, then take the results of the function call and display that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the average equal, then a bunch of arguments, and then some number hanging around down there. Wouldn't be terribly surprised, but I don't think so. I think this gets processed first. Okay, fingers crossed, here we go. Bunch of numbers, arguments, same thing, average, same thing. So that's very common to use, if a function returns a value, to immediately use that value in an output statement, in a calculation someplace, like our get random. Could then use our random number and to use it in a calculation. But that value is only available once. Invoker tools, I'm going to open those up here real quick. There's some examples of, and I think I showed you this last time, in the title case JavaScript. Here's an example of where I'm adding a function, sort of, adding a function to a class. The string class already exists, and this can only be done to classes. You cannot modify, like we did in Swift, you cannot modify the int class or the double class because they're not a class, they're primitive types. There's no class int that I know of in JavaScript. Maybe there now. But here what I'm doing is modifying the string. I'm changing the string class is what this is saying. Here's a prototype, and we've heard about prototypes in Swift as well, right? Prototypes are rules. In this case, it's not so much a rule as here's what it looks like when somebody says to title case. It's an inline function that ends here, but uses these functions. That's just a regular function that is called from inside of here someplace. Right there, cap special. Functions can call functions, no rules against that. But to add it to a class, you shouldn't need to, but it's more in there for my notes in case I ever want to modify the date class in JavaScript, or modify the string class some more in JavaScript and give it some capabilities that it doesn't have. Not anything I'm going to ask you to do.
What's your preference?
This one here,
Yeah.
prepositions, words that I wouldn't normally capitalize if they're in the middle of the string. The way this process is if it's anything that's at the middle of the string, and this wouldn't match the beginning of the string because it has a leading space. So if it's at the beginning, it gets capitalized. If it's one of these, they're the exceptions. If words, so if I got some words, and do they match the pattern of words, and you just basically check to see if it's in there and don't capitalize those. And then this is a regular expression. We're going to be talking about those in a couple of units down the road. A regular expression that says if it starts with Mac or Mook or O apostrophe, then make everybody else lowercase. Global. This is a pattern, a search pattern. It lets me change things. But these are all regular expressions, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. This is another one of those, if you don't know how it works, you could spend an hour looking at it, or you can just say, cool, black box, works, magic, let's move on. But the point here is that you can change classes. We are not going to be in this class developing classes in JavaScript. They're used a whole lot less in JavaScript than they are in other languages because that has to be sucked in, and then it's used as a prototype, and it's just, they're not used as much. Classes are used a lot less in JavaScript because they're tied to these browsers than they are in other languages. Doesn't mean they don't exist, just mean I'm not going to take the time to cover them. We can barely get through what we got already. Back to the notes. So we can add a method to a class, that's nice. And then you invoke it with a dot instead, as you would expect. We already know how to import functions. Let's format our average here. So our average was showing up with all kinds of decimal places, and I think I'll add a few more here just to make it interesting. That should screw up the average even more. Let's see what it looks like real quick. Don't forget to save it.
Put it in the comment, I think.
Oh, that's a good place. There, lots of decimal places. What if I don't want them? And you start looking at Voker tools, first of all, that'd be my first thought. Look in Voker tools, see if he's got anything that can help me out here. Currency key press coming later in the next chapter. Formatted date, we'll use that in a second. Here's a date picker control that uses JavaScript. You'll have to really read the documentation on that one. I haven't used it in a while because we've got some decent date pickers now. Decimal key press later, error handler later, format a number. Oh, that sounds good. Format number. First thing I do then is just throw it in my code, right? I'm going to go look at his documentation because he's just anal about that. So, we get to use N's and C's and P's like in C#, and there's also a G, by the way, that comes in very handy. G is basically unformat. If your string could have commas, dollar signs, percent signs, etc., all the rest of that stuff, G will unformat it, strip all the junk out. So in my case, the format number function, and notice it's a function, it's not added to any class. The format number function can serve two purposes, to format a number or to unformat. So here's a typical call. Notice it's format number, parentheses, the number you want, and then what format do you want. This is almost dumb now that I think about it. Why do I multiply by 1? Turns it into a number. So, pardon me? Well, it's positive, number one, it doesn't change it, but not necessarily. But why do I need to turn it into a number? Format number always returns a string. But again, the question is, why do I need to turn it into a number?
You don't, because it'll do it anyway.
Unless there's certain circumstances like concatenation where a plus sign would mean addition versus concatenation, and it's both, and it might get confused. And concatenate two strings together? Oh, right?
If you're
your strings are showing their quotation marks.
If your two numbers are still string, they're not, if they're variables, right, and I just unformatted it using this, that number that you see there, 1234.25, is still, when it comes out of this, we return a string. So formatted string comes out. And if you do that to another number, a formatted string comes out. And if you say number 1 plus number 2, they concatenate.
You get 11.
They get concatenated, and you get this big old long string of numbers instead of them adding. So in C#, dividing by integers is one of those warning things, right? In JavaScript, adding, be careful. Make sure you're adding numbers. As long as one of them is a number, then it should be fine. Should probably test that. Anyway, so there's format number, and you give it a format just like you do in C#, and the format comes second. So let's see if we can format our average. Wasn't I just here? There, I'm calculating it. Now, do I really want to wrap a format number around that? I could. It'd be ugly. This is one of those where I probably ought to stick it in a variable first. And I want that formatted for n.
You have to stick it in your JavaScript tag.
I need a new JavaScript tag. Good. Let's prove it. Come over here, and all of a sudden, my program doesn't work anymore. But if this weren't on, I got nothing. What's interesting is that I got nothing. My arguments list and all the rest of that stuff, nothing. But here, there's a parenthesis. As soon as it finds a syntax error in the JavaScript, it quits. Doesn't even process it. Doesn't process one line at a time. It looks at all of them. And it says, something's wrong. I'm missing a parenthesis. Oh. Really? Yeah, there's a document right line parenthesis. So that one was easy. Save. Refresh. Now I got something, but now I get a different error. Format number is not defined. And then if I'm having a rough day, I go back and I study my code, and is it format numbers? Is it number format? I realized today that I have format number, but I also have date format. Why isn't it format date? Because it's actually modifying the class in that case, and this one it does not. Right. So that's not included, so I need to copy my include statement here. And there we have to go, boy, there's an ugly name. Feel free, you don't have to use Volcker Tools 2013 1121. You just take the 1121 off, but then you'll never know if you've got the current version or not. I've been leaving them on there. They don't take a whole lot of typing to fix. So I have to add another folder here. Volcker Tools, is it one word? I think so. 2013 11 what? 1121. And you can always just, I think you can actually copy this. I can't get that one. Have to hit the folder or just click it. There we go. Oh, this is, sorry. In most languages, you collapse it like that. You get the path. In Windows, you get the path. But this is the Windows 8 classic thing. What?
And the white space.
There we go. Came back. Thank you. So then you could just highlight, but now I'm in a different place. There we go. Now you can just highlight that and paste it to be safe. Or highlight all of this and paste it to be safe. Save this, refresh, number format. Did I save it? I did.
You left it as functions.js instead of format number.
Thank you. And there it is, rounded. My notes then talk about going in and using the date function, but I think I'm going to skip that. Global variables, talk about them briefly here. Global variables is any variable that's declared outside of a function. Just like in C#, better have a pretty darn good reason, like multiple functions need access to this variable. Purists would say there's no such thing, but it can simplify things. So any function, any variable you declare inside of a function is local. It's only available to that function. Any variable that's outside is global. Rookie programmers would say, that's easy, I'll make them all global. That way I don't have to worry about it. They take up more memory and they last longer, and it's just poor programming. In programming logic, I taught you to start all your functions as local, all your variables as local, and then if you discover that multiple functions need access to that data, then consider making them global or passing them around or however you want it, other ways to deal with it. But if you wish in your, I'll tell you in advance, in your Unit 9 assignment, you can use global variables within reason. End of notes. Took a little longer than I hoped, but now you have an assignment. Your assignment is basically modify your Unit 8 program to use functions. So you're going to write a function that displays the even and odd numbers between x and y, or 1 and x. You're going to write a function that counts ghosts, bats, and witches. And then write a function that displays the results. Read the function descriptions carefully in the assignment to make sure that you don't have functions doing too much. Pretty sure that the function that counts ghosts, bats, and witches doesn't do any output except the prompting. Most functions, unless they're output functions, their job is to spit stuff out. Most functions do calculations, they don't output directly. It's like our calc average, or the random number one spits out some numbers, but in general it wouldn't do that. All right, so you're in lab the rest of the week. When do you want this due? Because you got a systems test on Monday, right? You want to make this due on Wednesday, just like your Swift project? Sure. You can always turn it in early. Wednesday it is. A week from this coming Wednesday. It'll be due, I think.
Really? Was this a test Monday? I don't know.
He doesn't know, but he doesn't like Monday assignments. I don't know why. It's those late football games, they'll kill you. Okay.
How about to make it different for on Thursday?
You make it on Thursday?
Yeah.
You get in the way of your RDD assignment instead?
That's fine.
We'll leave it Wednesday. You can always turn it in early and plan your own life around when your assignments are due.
So Wednesday at